You're walking through the marble streets of ancient Rome in 67 AD. The air is thick with incense and ambition. Beneath the shadow of the Colosseum, still under construction, Roman citizens whisper behind gilded togas and ivory masks. Hawk figs and honeyed wine, children dart through columns, and senators pass silently, each one carefully watching, but never truly seeing. Then suddenly, the crowd parts. A hush falls. He's here. The emperor himself, Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus. Germanicus emerges into the forum, draped in purple silks, woven with golden threads. The laurel wreath upon his brow is more crown than ornament. But it's not Nero that causes the murmurs. It's the figure beside him. A woman, no, a vision glides at his side. Dressed in translucent silks, her skin dusted with pearl-like shimmer. She seems carved from alabaster and kissed by Venus herself. Her lips are stained red. Her eyes downcast, but heavy with painted meaning. Yet those with long memories and even longer fears exchange. Looks of disbelief, because everyone knows. The truth, that radiant woman by the emperor's side, was once a boy named Sporus. And what Nero did to him was not merely scandalous. It was monstrous. A grotesque fantasy forced into flesh, broken man trying to reanimate the dead using the body of a child. This isn't just a tale of Roman decadence. It is a descent into imperial madness. It's a journey through obsession, mutilation, and erasure so profound it still haunts. History Sporus was not born to be a bride. He was made into one, by the most dangerous man in the world. Nero wasn't born a monster. He was made into one by empire, by paranoia, and by grief. Long before he would marry a boy he had mutilated to resemble his dead wife. Nero was hailed as Rome's golden hope. When Nero ascended the throne in 54 AD at the age of just 16, the city held its breath in anticipation. His tutors had been the best philosophers money and bloodline could bequeath among them, the Stoic Seneca. His early reign was marked by reforms that shocked the elite and delighted the masses. He reduced taxes, he banned executions, he funded public entertainment, and played music for the commoners. He walked among his people and listened to their complaints. For a while, Rome dared to believe it had found a philosopher king. But power in Rome wasn't a throne. It was a blade always, pointed, always trembling. And Nero was too young, too insecure, and too surrounded by serpents to hold it for long. His early years were riddled with manipulation from his domineering mother, Agrippina the Younger. She had clawed her way through the corpses of rivals to place him on the throne, so he expected to rule through him. Nero had other plans. Their relationship soured quickly. Agrippina began to oppose his political ambitions and especially his romantic entanglements, and she tried to publicly control him. Nero responded, the only way emperors knew how with murder. First he removed her guards, then her titles, then, finally, her life. One day she was empress mother, feared and revered. The next, she was a corpse floating in the bay, stabbed in the womb, the place where he had once grown. This was the first real fracture in Nero's psyche. He had killed the woman who gave him life, and in doing so, opened a door he could never close. After Agrippina's death, Nero descended rapidly into paranoia. He believed plots surrounded him, that everyone smiled with daggers behind their teeth, that even the Senate conspired in whispers. His friends became enemies. His advisors became threats. His reality became a hall of mirrors. And into this broken world walked Poppaea Sabina. Nero didn't just fall in love. He collapsed into it. And when Poppaea Sabina smiled, the world bent around her. Poppaea Sabina was unlike any woman Nero had ever known, ethereal in beauty, sharp in wit, and terrifying in her ambition. She captivated the emperor with a single glance. Born into wealth and trained in seduction, she had clawed her way, from noble wife to imperial mistress, with surgical precision. But she wasn't content with just Nero's bed. She wanted the crown, and she would have it at the time they met. Nero was already married to Claudia Octavia, a noblewoman adored by the Roman public. But Poppaea was relentless. She whispered poison into Nero's ear about Octavia's supposed infertility, her coldness, her lack of devotion. The emperor, already drowning in paranoia and craving validation, listened. Eventually, Nero divorced Octavia. When the people rioted in protest, demanding their beloved Octavia be reinstated, Nero responded with calculated cruelty. He accused her of adultery and ordered her execution. She was just 22 in Poppaea. She became empress to the outside world. It looked like she had one, but the palace was not a sanctuary. It was a stage for escalating madness. Nero adored her too. The point of delusion. He would cancel Senate meetings to sing to her. He composed poetry in her honor, built golden statues, and refused to be separated from her even during military campaigns. But Poppaea, always demanding, always volatile, grew irritated by Nero's neediness. Their love turned toxic one night. Historians say she confronted him over his prolonged absence from a chariot race. The argument grew heated. Nero, drunk and enraged, struck her viciously, kicking her in the stomach. She was pregnant, and she died, along with the child that night shattered. Nero, he had killed the only woman he truly loved, and in doing so, he broke something fundamental. Inside himself, for days he refused to eat. For weeks, he wandered the palace in blood-stained robes, whispering her name. But grief wasn't enough. Nero wanted Poppaea back, and so he began to look for her, not in spirit, but in flesh. And that's when he found Sporus, a young boy, fragile, beautiful, with the same pale skin, delicate bone structure, and downturned, mournful eyes as Poppaea. Nero didn't see a child. He saw a replacement. He was not a wife. He was not even a man yet. But to Nerosporos became a shrine built from delusion. The boy's name was Sporusa, name that cruelly means seed or sown one, linked to fertility and life. A bitter irony, considering what was about to be taken from him. He was barely in his teens when Nero's gaze fell upon him. Delicate and quiet, Sporus bore a haunting resemblance to the late Poppaea Sabina. Some historians believe that's the only reason Nero chose him. Others suggest Sporus was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time to pretty. Too powerless, too perfect a canvas for a grieving emperor's madness. What followed was not love, it was possession. Nero ordered the boy be taken into the imperial court and, under the cover of secrecy, commanded the unthinkable, that Sporus be castrated. It was a sentence, not a surgery. Roman physicians carried out the mutilation with no anesthesia, no concept of mercy, and no choice offered to the boy. The pain was unimaginable. The psychological devastation permanent. Nero dressed Sporus in silk gowns, had him trained to walk, speak, and behave like a Roman matron. He even forced courtiers to address Sporus as Lady Poppaea in public, and then he married him. A grand public ceremony was held where Nero, veiled and solemn, placed a golden ring on Sporus's finger. The boy, dressed in bridal robes, was paraded through Rome with imperial guards at his side. The emperor called him his wife. To Nero, it was devotion to everyone else. It was madness masquerading as ritual. Some historians try to interpret this event through modern lenses, suggesting Nero was ahead of his time in challenging gender norms. But this wasn't liberation. It was subjugation, an erasure of a boy's identity in the service of an emperor's grief. Sporus was no partner. He was a prop, molded into the shape of a dead woman to soothe the killer's conscience. But the empire played along. The court smiled, bowed, and celebrated the grotesque pantomime. 'Cause to laugh, to flinch. Two objects was to risk death. Nero had become untouchable, and Sporus had become the saddest bride in Roman history. Empires don't collapse in a single day. They rot from within one madness, one murder, one delusion at a time. By the time Nero married Sporus, the emperor had long abandoned any pretense of sanity. Rome wasn't being ruled, it was being held hostage by a god-king with a flute in one hand and a dagger in the other. Nero fancied himself an artist, not a ruler. He sang operas in public, forcing senators to applaud for hours. He built palaces of gold and marble while the people starved. and when a massive fire gutted the city in 64 C, killing thousands, rumors swirled that Nero himself had ordered it just to clear space for a new pleasure palace. Worse still, he needed a scapegoat. He blamed the Christians, then a small and misunderstood sect hand ordered them executed in ways so savage they turned stomachs even in brutal Rome. Some were torn apart by wild beasts in arenas. Others were dipped in tar and set alight as human torches to illuminate. Nero's garden parties. The empire groaned under his madness. Rebellions flared in the provinces. The army muttered of treason. Governors defied imperial orders. The Senate. Once a puppet began to break its strings, and through it all, Sporus remained at Nero's side silent, dressed as Poppaea, made to comfort a man unraveling in front of the world. Was he still a child then, or had something inside him already? Withered beyond recognition? In 68 CE, the final blow fell. The Roman governor Galba declared open rebellion. Legions turned against Nero. The Senate, in a rare act of courage, declared Nero a public enemy, a man to be captured and executed by the state he once ruled. Nero panicked. He fled. Rome with a handful of loyalists, Sporus among them. But loyalty means little when the world is ending. As imperial guards deserted and news of his condemnation reached him, Nero fell into despair. He sobbed, cursed, and begged Sporus to help him die. But the boy his so-called bride couldn't bring himself to deliver the final blow. So Nero took his own life, or tried to. History records that he bungled the suicide, trembling and weeping as he plunged a dagger into his throat with the help of a servant. His final words, Qualis, artifex, perio. What an artist dies in me, Rome exhaled. The tyrant was dead. But Sporus' tragedy was far from over. With Nero dead, Sporus should have been free. But what do you call freedom when your face is the mirror of a monster's madness? After Nero's death, the Roman Empire entered chaos. Civil war erupted as 4 emperors fought for power in a single year: Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and finally Vespasian. But in this storm of shifting thrones and swords, no one asked what would become of Sporus. He was not a prince, not a senator, not even a citizen in the eyes of many. He was a symbol, bleeding relic of Nero's degeneracy. And symbols are dangerous when the old regime has collapsed. Yet instead of vanishing or being executed, Sporus was passed around like a cursed artifact, became a kind of imperial trophy proof of one's triumph over the last emperor. First came Nymphidius Sabinus, one of Nero's former praetorian prefects, who tried to seize the throne after Nero's fall. Nymphidius took Sporus into his home and disturbingly also referred to him as Empress. He paraded Sporus in public, reenacting the same grotesque bridal scenes Nero once did. It was as if killing Nero hadn't ended the madness, it had merely inherited it. But Nymphidius failed to claim power. He was assassinated by his own guards. Then came Otho, another short-lived emperor, who also kept Sporus by his side. The boy now belonged to his third master, each treating him less like a human and more like a living echo of Poppaea, Sabina illusion they couldn't let die. Sporus' identity was a burden he could not shed. To the public, he was a ghost. In a dress, to the powerful, he was an object of twisted nostalgia. But imagine his reality dragged from court to court, forced to relive his trauma before crowds who whispered his name with pity, revulsion, or amusement. He had no voice. Power. No choice. And yet he survived. Even as the empire convulsed, and emperors rose and fell in a matter of weeks, Sporus lived on, navigating palaces drenched in blood and corridors lined with whispers. He was no longer a boy, but neither was he, a man the world recognized. He was trapped in a body and identity that had been manufactured by violence. Rome had forgotten his name, but they never forgot his face. Some men are murdered with swords, others are destroyed with laughter. After the brief reigns of Galba and Otho, the imperial throne passed to Vitellius, a gluttonous general with a taste for cruelty. If Nero had been madness and Otho decay, Vitellius was rot made flesh. His rule was short-lived, but his appetite for spectacle knew no bounds, and it was under Vitellius that Sporus, and now nearing adulthood, faced the most degrading moment of his life. Rome was a city addicted to theater, but Vitellius blurred the line between performance and punishment. One of his favorite entertainments, watching powerful men reduced to animals or making public mockeries of his enemies. And who better to humiliate than the ghost bride of Nero? According to the historian Cassius Dio, Vitellius planned a grotesque final act for Sporus. He intended to publicly stage a theatrical reenactment of the rape of Proserpina, the myth where the virgin goddess is dragged down to the underworld by Pluto. But in this twisted parody, Sporus would play Proserpina in front of thousands of Roman citizens, jeering, watching. He would be dragged into the arena, dressed in bridal robes, and symbolically raped by Pluto all. Under the guise of theater, it would have been the final erasure of his dignity, not execution, not exile, but degradation so deep that death would be a mercy. And Sporus knew it. Rather than endure this ultimate humiliation, this ritualized, state-sanctioned reenactment of his traumas, Barrus made a final desperate choice. He took his own life, just as Nero had once wept and begged for help with suicide. Now Sporus did the same. The cycle of imperial abuse had reached its end, but the victim had no audience left to mourn him. He was likely in his early 20s, and yet, in those few years, he had been raped, mutilated, paraded, politicized, and finally marked for execution. By humiliation, no name, no monument, no funeral procession. Just a fading rumor in the backstreets of Rome, a boy who had once worn the veil of an empress, now forgotten by the city that consumed him. History forgets those it cannot categorize. And Sporus, he belonged nowhere. When Sporus took his own life, the Roman world moved on without a pause. No statue was carved, no tomb erected, no elegy composed. Even historians barely recorded his passing. What we know of him survives only in scattered footnotes, mentioned briefly in the writings of Suetonius, Cassius Dio, and Tacitus, not as a human being, but as a grotesque detail in Nero's tragic saga. He was remembered not by his own name, but through the identities others forced upon him. Poppia's shadow, Nero's bride, a tragic ornament in the mad theater of emperors. The cruelty of his story was so extreme that some Roman writers didn't believe it. Others retold it with smirking detachment, as though it were a cautionary tale or political satire, but none mourned him. Why? Because Sporus was not useful to history. He did not command legions. He did not pen philosophy, did not die in battle or ignite revolution. He was a scar on the empire's conscience, a reminder that power does not always kill with swords sometimes. It mutilates with ceremony. For centuries, Sporus was erased, dismissed, or turned into a symbol of imperial depravity. Christian historians later used his story to portray the moral collapse of pagan Rome. Some mocked him as proof of Nero's effeminacy. Others ignored him entirely. But Sporus was not a monster. He was a child sexually mutilated and enslaved by emperors, forced to play a part in a drama written by sadists. If there is anything monstrous in his story, it's not Sporus, it's the civilization that created and consumed him, and still, across millennia, his image survives in a faint, tragic silhouette. He has become the patron ghost of those who are erased for not fitting the narrative, captive of gender, power, and empire, trapped in a story that was never his own. What Rome did to Sporus, the modern world often does with different tools. Centuries have passed since Sporus's body was discarded by history, but his ghost still walks among us, not as a figure of ancient tragedy, but as a mirror of modern injustice. In today's world, we like to believe we're more enlightened than the Romans. We punish differently. We don't castrate children for imperial theater. But the mechanisms of erasure, of humiliation, of forced identity, those remain. They've just evolved. Sporus was not transgender as we understand it. He didn't choose his identity, it was ripped from him. But his story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about agency, gender, and performance. Who gets to define someone's gender? Who controls the narrative? And what happens to those who fall outside it? In many cultures today, gender nonconforming individuals still face state violence, surgical coercion, and cultural erasure. Children are still forced into roles they never asked for. Victims of abuse are still turned into symbols, stripped of their humanity. Spores reminds us that performance isn't always voluntary, that the mask society hands you may not fit, but you'll be punished if you try to remove it. He also reminds us of the danger of historical silence, because Sporus left no writings, no voice, no memoirs. He is remembered only through the gaze of those who hurt him. That absence forces us to ask, how many other voices were lost in empire? How many Sporus-like lives were swallowed by spectacle? And yet, in a strange way, Sporus survived, not in body, not in statue, but in shadow. His story has begun to echo in academic circles, in gender studies, in literature, and queer theory. His name, once a whispered footnote, now appears in conversations about power, identity, and exploitation. He has become an icon not of queerness, but of stolen choice, the child who never got to grow up, the bride who never became wife, the actor who never got to leave the stage. Before the wedding dress, before the gold veil, there was just a boy. Long before the whispers of emperors, before the mutilation, before the spectacle, there was simply a boy. We don't know his birth name, we don't know his mother's face or the village he played in. We don't know if he ever laughed freely, or what dreams he may have had before Nero entered his world like a plague. We only know what history let slip, a name given by Rome, Sporus, meaning seed. A cruel irony, since Nero ensured this boy would never plant any of his own. If we strip away the pageantry, the horror, the twisted ceremonies, what remains is a child consumed by a machine far bigger than himself. A life rewritten, reshaped, and erased by the monstrous needs of power. And isn't that the true story of empire? Not marble palaces or triumphal arches, but the forgotten bodies that built them. Not emperors, but those they crushed beneath their sandals. Nero's name echoes through history as a madman, a tyrant, a performer of chaos. But Sporus, he echoes. In silence, a boy with no voice, no legacy, only trauma, still. That silence speaks. It forces us to look beyond the grandeur of emperors and listen to those who history tried to forget. Forces us to ask how many more Sporus-like souls have vanished behind the veils of empire. How many lives were twisted to fit the desires of rulers? How often do we still mistake cruelty for ceremony? In Sporus, we see not just tragedy, but a mirror. A reminder of how easily humanity can be sacrificed for spectacle. How identities can be carved by violence. How the most vulnerable are always the first to be devoured by power. Let us not remember Sporus as a bride. Let us not remember him as a mock empress. Let us remember him as a boy unnamed, unloved and unfree. That, perhaps, is the only justice we can still offer him.